privilege of introducing the next two speakers. My name is Dave Harry, otherwise known as the Process Whisperer. I'm a retired Navy pilot, and I look at the audience as my friends, but more than that, my family. And so I've been to 6 family reunions. This is my 6th KataCon, and it's a wonderful journey to make with you all, and look forward to Jekyll Island next year. It's my privilege to introduce Steve Medland. Steve he began his kata journey long before I did. He began it 12 years ago in education with Bill Constantino. He was, after that, after 2011, within about 2 weeks, Bill began working for Volvo in Sweden. And then he was hooked on kata, and he's been hooked ever since. And he's been coaching, teaching, and doing kata for the last 12 plus years. So it's my pleasure to introduce Steve. And Steve's going to talk about Kata Community Update. So I think this is our second Kata Community Update of the morning. And welcome, Steve. Here's your clicker.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Dave. I recognize something, and I recognize that I and Jeff behind me are the only thing standing between this group and lunch. So right now, I am in the obstacle portion of your storyboard, and hopefully in 5 minutes, I will move to the what we learned portion of your storyboard. So that is my target condition. So I want to start going back in a little history. I want to go back in time. Let's go back into the history books here. Maybe not that far. Yeah, that far. Let's go back there. When we first started doing kata years ago, we started with the idea that we would do a process analysis. And the process analysis looked something like this. We start with planned cycle time and tack time and number of shifts. It was very manufacturing oriented. Very quickly, we moved to a place where we realized not every organization has a tack time, or they don't understand their tack time. So we had another form. We had an alternate form. We called it the general form. You see up at the very top there, general. And then we had another form that if they didn't have any of this, it was this. It was just blank, right? And I found that when we got here, we got blank minds also. And this was a struggle, because I once was asked to go to Europe and coach an organization where another coach had done the launch of kata. And I was coming back a month later to visit and to get them back going, whatever was happening, right? Many of people in the room who've coached outside organizations, you realize you're picking up the pieces sometimes of what happened before you. And that's what happened here. And I realized what happened was that the person who coached before me went to a software company and used the manufacturing form for process analysis. It made sense to this coach. There was some pace of demand, there were patterns of work, there was variation. It made sense in the coach's mind. When I went back a month later, the entire program was ready to fall apart. They were ready to quit because they couldn't get past tack time. They spent a month trying to understand tack time. And they still practiced. It was great. They continued to do experiments. It was wonderful. But I realized the launch maybe wasn't the way it should have been. So I started thinking maybe there's a different way to do this. Maybe there's a better way to think about this for organizations that don't have a tack time or don't understand their tack time or exit cycle fluctuation. So I started looking for patterns. And as I coached this form, I started to realize there was a lot of questions in this area. There was questions in this area, WIP and number of operators and exit cycle fluctuation. In a software company, they don't really have cycles. There's some cycles involved in the programming, but in the actual operation of the software, there's not cycles. The software does what it does. But in this area down here, equipment capacity, some organizations don't have equipment that they have to worry about capacity on. But this area, there was a lot of discussion, there was a lot of good ideas. This area, other observations, there were lots of observations about the process. Then if I was using this form, there were similar patterns. There were question marks in these areas. There was a lot of good discussion here, and there was definitely some performance data. And when I got to this form, this is when things really fell apart. Because with no structure, people will just decide what their own target conditions are. Say, yeah, well, what's your target condition? We want pizza. What's your actual condition? No, we have no pizza. And metrics, you want metrics on this? It really, really falls apart. Getting a run chart, getting a target lines, all you get is pie charts. Too early? Too early, still. So what we built over time, and Brandon Brown has been very, very involved in this. I didn't invent this system at all. When we start looking at a process analysis, we start with the block diagram. We're really asking with this block diagram is not for the tool itself. We're asking what is the pattern of work. The block diagram is just a mechanism for us to get there. And if a team can't understand a block diagram, well, let's just write some notes. And then I will help them see the pattern of work based on the notes they're writing. So the block diagram doesn't represent a tool, it represents a way of thinking. What is our pattern of work? Describe your pattern of work. Then we get down to the current process characteristics, because those are the boxes that were always full when I was coaching the other forms. What are some current facts about the process? Things that were not captured in our block diagram and our pattern of work, but they are true about this process. Some good, some bad, some questions, things we know, things we don't know. And then metrics. There's always metrics. So breaking it down into what is the pattern of work, what are the facts, what are the metrics, is a little easier than what is your tack time, and they freeze. They lose their minds right away. And then you build a target condition that's similar. What pattern of work do we want to see in X number of weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? What facts do we want to be true at that point in time? And what do we want our metrics to look like? So if you're struggling with the forms, maybe break it down into a simpler set of questions. What is the current pattern of work? What are the facts? What are the metrics? By the way, you may even try it in a manufacturing setting and then later start adding these elements, because your learner might only be ready for those three primary questions, and then you can start adding more elements later on. Okay, so something to think about. So if you find that bed on the left is too hard, and the bed on the right is too hard, and the bed in the middle is too soft, maybe this bed is just right. So experiment with that. Where have I seen this work really well? In healthcare, where you're looking at patient care quality metrics, so pressure injuries, what people used to call bed sores or pressure ulcers, are called pressure injuries now. This is not something where there's a tack time. How many pressure injuries do you want a day? You know, what's our output? We don't want any. It's a quality metric. So what are the patterns of work that get us no pressure injuries or fewer pressure injuries? What are the facts about it? How are we going to measure that? Okay? Different way of looking at it rather than what's the exit cycle fluctuation. Infections acquired at the healthcare facility, same thing. We want it to be zero. There's our metric. So what are the patterns of work that are driving to that? Okay? Software company I worked with, I mentioned them a little while ago, the number of transactions that go through automatically, what they call STP, or straight through pass. Anytime a transaction goes through the software, gets kicked out to a human being, that's kind of like considered a defect or a faulty transaction. There's no tack time for that. There's millions of transactions going through this software all the time. So understanding the pace doesn't really help us. Understanding the problems helps us. So it's a quality metric. Asking about tack time, asking about exit cycle fluctuation doesn't help them. And then in like a small hospital emergency room, we're not thinking about the number of operators. There's going to be one doctor. There's going to be 2 or 3 nurses. At 3 p.m. or 3 a.m., it's the same. They see maybe 20 or 30 patients a day. It's more about variation in demand and variation in process. So the discussion is really around what are our patterns of work? What are the facts? How are we doing things? Not about what's our customer pace, because it's highly, highly variable. Okay? So just something to think about. Thank you. I appreciate your time.